Hello and welcome to The Common Bridge. This is the fiercely nonpartisan podcast and YouTube TV channel where we talk about the issues of the day, the opportunities of the moment, and most importantly, what some policy solutions might be. Today, we have our guest, Sean Michael Pigeon. We're going to talk about something that doesn't often get discussed, and that has to do with standardized testing and their role. So Sean, welcome to The Common Bridge. I'm so happy that you're with us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. So standardized testing was the gold standard for college admissions for many, many years. Now, in recent years, there's been claims about discrimination bias in the test itself that disadvantages minorities and students from less economically prosperous areas. Some colleges have dropped standardized testing as a means of measuring college aptitude entirely. Some school systems are following suit. And so today our guest, Sean Pigeon, is going to discuss this from his perspective. And this is an angle that you probably haven't considered yet. I anticipate some education and perhaps some policy ideas. Sean, our audience at the Common Bridge likes to know a little bit about our guests. So just tell us a little bit. Where were you born? Where'd you grow up? And what were your early days like?
Thank you so much for having me. So I was raised in Texas. I was raised in a relatively low income family. And my father was a teacher at a local private school, so I was able to go there. But there's been a shift towards, I'm talking about the standardized testing that we currently use, which is the SAT or the ACT for college admissions, that we've been using since 1926, that they disadvantage minorities, or they disadvantage low income individuals. And part of something that I've written in USA Today recently was arguing that while these disparities do exist and they are real and there are some barriers, that eliminating all of these sort of hard metrics from the admission process would disadvantage people like me and would disadvantage low-income individuals, because those metrics give people a chance to succeed, and they do give it a chance for there to be economic and social mobility. So that's really what I'm trying to get at with some of this.
That's wonderful. What area in Texas were you from?
I'm from Dallas-Fort Worth, so in the northern region. I'm hop, skip, and a jump away from Dallas. So
wonderful. And how far away are you from? Excuse me. Where are you going to college right now?
Right now, I'm a senior at Yale University. I'm studying political science there. So
wonderful.
It's
so
an exciting opportunity.
Tough to get admitted.
Sure.
Tough to make it to your senior year, and I'd imagine some sharp elbows being thrown in those political science classes.
Very much so. Very much so. I like to say that there's a lot of politics in the political science department. So
a lot. But look, college's supposed to be fun too. So what are you doing for fun? You playing any sports or music, or what's your social life like? Remember, this could go out to 500,000 listeners. So
I'll make sure not to say anything too off the wall. But Yale has a very robust political realm. So I'm sort of involved in that. I'm involved with the Yale Political Union, for instance, and there's a lot of friendships that are made there. I will say, off campus, I do a lot of weightlifting, and that's quite it gets some of the stress out, you know what I mean, because there are a lot of sharp elbows.
It was leg day for me today. Okay, I'm just sitting here basking in it. So
leg day is always tough.
Yes.
So
okay, good. So you did write a very interesting opinion piece in the USA Today. And what caused you to write the piece? And I'm going to try to bring it up here, and I know we'll have a link to it at richardhelppie.com. The title of it is "Don't Blame the Test. Getting rid of standardized testing means punishing poor students." And I thought it was a great piece, and that's what caused us to reach out to you. But what caused you to write it?
Yeah, so about a year and a half ago, I got involved with a local magnet school in New Haven called East Rock. There, I teach elementary school kids about journalism and writing, and that's really where I got interested in the politics of the education system, because those kids are wonderful, and I love working with them. But there are a lot of difficulties that they face in achieving academic potential, and one of the common refrains that I hear at Yale particularly is the idea that the standardized testing and the way in which we're doing admissions process is fundamentally flawed, and therefore we need to scrap the whole system. And that is, whenever I hear the phrase "scrap the whole system," or we need to revamp everything, my ears sort of perk up. And I think that like using my own background and the place that I come from, that I wanted to put out a different perspective, that instead of blaming the tests or blaming the students themselves, that there is a real chance for people like me and for people from those communities to reach up and get their social mobility, because there's sometimes some fatalism that occurs where people feel like because the system's rigged, or they're told the system is rigged, that they can't move up. And I think that itself is kind of a dangerous
Well,
mindset to
I
have.
can understand that, in that one of the charitable causes near and dear to my heart is the mentoring of students,
Mhm.
many of whom have never had a family member go to a higher education,
For sure.
heavily minority um, weighted, maybe 60%,
Mhm.
and then but finding out that if there are standards and with the right coaching and such, that they can achieve. Um, but in your article, you say activists argue standardized tests must be discontinued to dismantle white supremacy.
Mhm.
And look, it worked for you, but I think you're making an argument along a class line versus a racial line. So
Mhm.
what kind of feedback have you gotten from your post? What kind of reception are people giving you, pro or con?
Well, I mean, unsurprisingly, I've gotten some people that have reached out to me that are in favor of what I wrote and are against it. It's actually interesting. I got two high schoolers that messaged me, and one of them said that what I had said was really empowering to them, and that they wish that they'd heard more of that when they were going through their admissions process. And then I heard it from another junior who's going through the process themselves right now, who said that they completely disagreed with what I said. So I think that there's split opinions even amongst high schoolers themselves. But one of the reasons why I think this is an important topic to discuss is because I do think that the overwhelming emphasis right now is on racial discrimination. And while I think a lot of that gets caught up in the kind of class problems that some people from low income communities have, I think that it's evidenced by the numbers, at least, that the class distinctions here are the ones that are driving most of this difference. So, for instance, the people with come from families from the bottom 20th percentile, so people making under 20K a year, historically score the worst on these standardized tests, whereas people who make from families $200,000 and more score in the highest quintile. And
Sure.
that's kind of in some ways unsurprising, because tutors and people who have those kinds of means are able to spend more time learning the system. But I think that um, focusing too much on the problems of academic sorting don't allow us to look at some of the benefits of, you know, people not going for instance to either the best schools, but they are going to, and they are raising their standard, and they're raising their lot in life, and those are really important success stories to highlight.
Now, I understand what you're saying, although I don't think it can be denied that, some of what the critics will say about standardized testing is that you're trying to measure a student's readiness for higher education, but their experience in life is going to impact that. So, look at
Mhm.
this. If you have a young person that grows up in rural Montana, and part of that test is how to get around New York riding the subway system. Or, you take an urban child out of Houston and you ask questions that, someone that grows apples in the Pacific Northwest might know. I can see where the a cultural bias in the test does come from where, people originate. That seems to make sense, doesn't it?
Of course it does. Of course it does. And there's a paradigmatic example of this in the SAT itself, which is that there used to be an analogies part of the SAT where they had this question that said a runner is like a marathon, or is to a marathon like an oarsman is to what? And if a person doesn't know about rowing, so for instance, I don't know anything about rowing. I've never been on a sailing team. I like it would be very difficult to answer that. And in fact, we did see that there was a big disparity between people that were of minorities, people of color weren't able to answer that question because they didn't have that context. However, what we're seeing is that one, a lot of the SAT itself has been redesigned to try to minimize those effects. So there's been a specific and importantly like driven by the SAT and within internal reviews to make sure that those cultural biases don't rear themselves as much in the test, but also that the majority of the disparity is driven by the math section and not by the vocabulary and not by the reading sections. And I think that at that point we can start looking to what are the educational systems that people are having when they're in elementary school or in high school that's driving some of these differences, rather than assigning the blame to cultural or to racial differences that I think sometimes obscures the problem.
Well, I think that's a very valid point, and I think you say that in your article in
Mhm.
USA Today. You say that it's less about the test and more about high school's failure to properly educate.
Mhm.
And I can tell you something I've witnessed personally. Wayne State University, which is a state
Mhm.
university in Detroit, Michigan. The number one class they had for students coming out of Detroit public school system was remedial math.
Mhm.
I'm talking basic arithmetic. And a couple of professors took it upon themselves to teach higher math to Detroit public school students. And they, given the opportunity to learn and somebody motivated to teach them, they were amazing. They were blew past me, and I'm above average in math.
For sure.
So what your point is, and I think you've made it in your article, is that blaming the test isn't helping anyone, and that math is math.
Mhm. Yeah, and I would also say that when we say the word standardized tests, we need to be a bit more specific about what we mean, because there's two different types of tests. There's achievement tests, which are the kind of tests that we take in high school. That is, have you read the book? What was the main character's name? What was his mother's name? Things to that effect. And then there's aptitude tests, which are like the SAT and the ACT, which are theoretically projecting performance. So it's not about what it's theoretically about what you do, what you're supposed to do, be able to do in the future. But those aptitude tests are built on achievement tests. Like you first have to have enough information about math to be able to assess a person's ability to do it in the future. And so I do think that there's a real lacking in those kind of basic foundational work in order to be able to, for the aptitude test to be able to work, we have to first address these achievement problems.
So more like, if I could draw the parallel, then an aptitude test might be more akin to measuring a student athlete and
Mhm.
whether they can run and jump and have strength and vision and those types of things. That's
Mhm.
they thinks that person would be a good athlete, and
Right.
then how did they actually do when they competed? Is that
Yes.
kind of the parallel? Is that a good parallel?
Very, very, very much so. In the NFL, they have the tape, which is what you've done, right, in college, and then they have the combine, right, which is where they measure whether how fast person runs, their lateral quickness, and that's very much more the aptitudes, which is how much can we predict this person going into the future. But if a person was poorly trained um, in there by their coaches and throughout time, it's going to have an impact on their ability to run those drills. And um, there was a very interesting piece that came out, a news article that came out that's to your point earlier about Wayne State, which is that a public school in Baltimore, the GPA of the students there was so low that a person with a 0.13 GPA, which is they had passed 3 classes in 4 years, was still in the 62nd percentile of
Wow.
students there. And that puts people at a real disadvantage when coming at these aptitude tests for colleges, because it just doesn't put them in a position to succeed. And I think that that's really where a lot of our focus needs to be had.
Right. And I think you've made the point in your article that, tests aren't designed to be pleasant. They're stressful, they're hard. And I know that my experience in mentoring young people is that those that work hard and achieve have a sense of inner satisfaction and build up a core system. But, we do need to be attentive to great minds and great talent, no matter what their starting point is. And so I think, mathematics, okay, that's reasonably easy to say, yep, that's objective, right?
Yeah.
And unless things get really out of hand, 2+2 is 4. Physics work the way physics works. Okay, the airplane flies because of simple math. Those are pretty inarguable, I would hope. But
you're not going to find an argument for me.
yeah, I actually tried to get people to agree one time on like the law of gravity and failed. So anything can be said. We're pretty divided. But and then let's look at things like geography. Is there a racial or a class way to ask where Russia is located on a map or what the capital of Kansas is? I mean, is there really a difference? And is that part of the test, that kind of basic world knowledge?
I think that where we would find some of that coming up would be in the essay portions of the test, for instance. So the essay portions of the test are where a person's general ability to write is being assessed. And there are certain perhaps some metrics there that would be more difficult to quantify. And so having, basic knowledge of geography, basic knowledge of, for instance, like the news or political events would be useful. And in that sense, there could be a skewed bias by the reader. If a reader perhaps doesn't agree with what a person's writing or doesn't agree with a person's writing style, that could creep up into the tests. But I would mention that not only has the SAT taken measures to do so. So for instance, they're now canceling the writing exam or the writing portion of their exam. But this move towards saying that academic sorting doesn't help minorities, I think is a difficult one to swallow in some ways, because for instance, there's evidence that if we have neutral race, neutral testing, that minorities actually do better. And there's a new study from out in Florida which said that when they had a race neutral testing of math and of linguistic ability and of writing ability, that the number of Hispanic and Black students actually doubled because of it. And I'm not willing to sort of go down the route that all of these kinds of factors are things that minorities can't master or that people from low income can't master, because taking away those opportunities just takes away the ability for people like me that came from low income areas, that we can't go to Rome and we can't go to summer in a foreign country or go to like expensive internships. Those are really crucial markers for someone to be able to prove themselves.
It'd be like if you have somebody that could excel at track, or wrestling, something that's an individual sport, but they were denied the opportunity to excel because we're not going to keep track of wins and losses and how fast you ran. People wouldn't begin to get a sense of their own talents, and that's frankly part of growing up, is to figure out what you're good at and what you're not good at. If you, for example, go to the records of Major League Baseball, you will not find my name in there. Okay, and because I had to, I figured out a long time ago.
I hadn't looked through them, but I'll take your word for
it. I lack the talent to do that. But look, Sean, one of the touchy areas really has got to be vocabulary, because different cultures, different ethnicities use different words, different slangs. If you've ever been to Hawaii, you find they basically mix it all in there. It's English and Japanese and Hawaiian and Chinese and a little Portuguese and some stuff that I don't know where it came from. But it's a different way of communicating. So, I mean, vocabulary, you've got to say that's got some kind of class distinction or ethnic distinction, or, I mean, could it be argued, hey, a dictionary is a dictionary and we all need to learn the same dictionary?
I think that this is a very strong point, right? And I do want to say that there is certainly gains to be made, and there are things that we can do better in the future. This is not like, I don't think that there's a perfect system available, but there is certainly a more perfect system than the current one that we have. So, for instance, I do think the SAT publishing a dictionary of the words that they'll use and the words that they think would be likely to show up on the test would be a real step in the right direction.
Oh yeah, great idea.
Because that would allow people to at least have a sense of what will or will not be on like a vocabulary portion of the test.
And does this spill over into advanced placement courses in high schools? And, um, you know, I know that in recent years, it was determined that the top students in the United States, we could compete with anybody in the world. And we've had, economic challenges from Japan, China, the BRIC countries, and so forth. And it was determined that our top students are among the best in the world, but on the average, we didn't do that great. Is giving up advanced placement that I've read about, like in New York and elsewhere, is that at risk of, even Bill Maher says, at not nurturing our best and brightest?
I do think that the situation regarding AP tests is emblematic of this larger problem, but sort of in a unique way. So AP tests are one of those achievement tests that I was talking about earlier, right? Which you try to assess whether a person has learned the material. And there's been a move against advanced placement tests because for that very reason, right? Which is that they're not evenly distributed across all school districts, and that it's difficult for instance, a school district like Baltimore, like I was just talking about, to have an AP test program at all, which may disadvantage their chances of getting into higher education. However, there are private elite not universities, but private elite high schools that don't use AP exams and they don't use AP tests, or they offer a limited selection of them because they already know that universities trust their regular programs. So, for instance, Del Barton is essentially a feeder school for a lot of Ivy Leagues. Phillips Exeter or Andover. These are very, very expensive, very, very difficult to get into. Almost university light in a way,
right?
right?
Private, high-end private college prep schools. Yes, sir.
Exactly. And they don't offer every advanced placement test in the world or every advanced placement course. And if we were to take them all away, then schools would like Yale and Harvard and a lot of these other places, even like Georgetown and schools like that, would still trust Del Barton, and they would still trust Phillips Exeter because they know those schools. They know the people that come out of those schools. But if a place like, where I come from in Texas, that I didn't go to a school that anyone knows, the AP test was a real way for me to be able to show that I can do the material, and I know how to study, and I know how to prove some academic excellence. So AP tests are actually a very good example, I think, and I'm glad that you brought it up, of the way in which they do kind of set a level playing field for even people that aren't at those kind of very, very elite university light or university feeder schools to prove themselves.
I have never thought about it that way, and I think that is one of the compelling arguments right there, because I know the school system, it's Wayne Memorial High School, Wayne, Michigan, that I've been involved with for many years, that our students would not have a chance to distinguish themselves if they could not say, look what I did on my standardized testing. Here's what I did to take advantage of the advanced placements that are courses that were available to me. And through our program, we've had young men and women going to places like Stanford and Yale and Harvard and the University of Michigan and Penn State and so forth, as well as, we don't force kids to go toward college, but they're graduating with, real work skills, or at least a better sense of being able to achieve a goal.
Sure.
And I want to kind of shift a little bit here. You make a point, and I think it's a really powerful one, that, rich parents, people that are connected, it doesn't matter what the standards are. They're coming, right? It doesn't matter if it's a test or holistic. In fact, I would think not taking the test might be an advantage if their child maybe wasn't qualified.
I would say very much so. Yes. I mean, I mean, just it's a little bit like looping back around to schools like Exeter. 30% of people that go to Exeter go to an Ivy League college after they graduate, and it's no surprise, I think, that in the recent years we've seen families get busted for literally bribing admissions officers
Yeah, right,
to
right.
like literally creating false slots in like lacrosse teams or track teams in order to be able to slot these people in. The fact it's a natural parental urge to want to do well and have one's children do well, and I'm not going to fault the urge itself, but those kinds of problems are going to crop up, I think, and I think they'll crop up with more regularity if the entire system is based on a holistic soft skills sort of measurement, because the University of Los Angeles, so UCLA, had over 165,000 applicants to their undergraduate program last year. I mean, that's so many people that they're looking for measurements that are kind of easy for the admissions council to look at. They're looking for heuristics, and one of those is going to be whether one has gone to a prestigious high school. But if it's not that, it's going to be something else. And I think that standardized metrics are a lot more of a firmer ground for people like me and for people that are even of a different minority or a different race than the majority to kind of grasp and get their feet on.
That makes sense, that UCLA could look at it and say, look, we have this student here, went to this great school and they graduated, so they know where they probably can be okay. They look at someone else here that maybe went to a disadvantaged place. They, I don't know, but wow, look at those SAT scores and look at the ACT and, look at this essay. I don't know how they did it, but they're ready for us. So I think you make a strong point for a way for a disadvantaged student to maybe get noticed.
I also wanted to flag a little bit that there are places in the University of California system that are thinking of doing away with the A through F grading system. So I don't think that it's just about the SATs. I don't think my piece is intended to be just about SATs or ACTs. It's about the idea that academic sorting and having a way for instance, advanced math classes around the country are being considered for the chopping block. And I think that's also another concern, right? Because it's not just about like one test. This isn't just about giving students one essay to write, right? There's an entire 4 years worth of work, and that really encompasses more of what a student is able to do in high school. But under the auspices of the same arguments that are being made against the SAT are also being made against A through F grading, and saying that instead of having a 4.0 GPA or a 3.5 GPA, we should just do letters of recommendation or soft measurement of skills, which I think is also a dangerous way of setting a precedent going forward.
Horribly dangerous in that if the philosophy of the instructor that you need the recommendation from and your point of view, that is a deadly collision. Also, the thing with A through F, grades are tough, but it also helps people understand that if you're, having a hard time grasping mathematics, but your art teacher thinks you're wonderful, that's kind of a clue about where you might want to be spending your time. And, similarly, if you're a whiz at math and you're like me, you can't draw, but you're pretty good at math and words, that kind of tells you might want to head in a different direction. So
it is
Sean, one of
important.
the things that you said when you close your column, and I really like this, and I'm just going to read it verbatim if you don't mind, because I think it's so good. You say, no, a student's SAT or GPA is not the only thing that matters. And this is what I really like. Character, leadership, and kindness matter far more in life. I thought that showed a lot of wisdom. And then you go on and say, just because a test doesn't tell us everything about a person doesn't mean it is useless. And it certainly doesn't make us racist. But if schools abandon these important benchmarks, they will certainly become classist. I think you've laid out a case for that. Sean, what didn't we cover today that perhaps we should have discussed?
Well, the only other thing that I would want to put out there is that I think that there are ways for us to ameliorate the situation that we're talking about, which is that there are disadvantages that people that come from low income backgrounds, and there are disadvantages that people come from communities of color or minorities have. And there is, I think, a way though forward that doesn't just require us to accept the status quo system, which is that um, I really think that grade inflation across the nation has happened in a way that is detrimental to a person's ability to stand out. I think that it's pretty well documented that people used to be a C student, that used to be you're an average student, and that now if you're a B plus student, that means you're average, or if you're a B student, it means you're average, right? So that kind of been creeping up over time, and I think that that has kind of devalued the grading system that we do have and made it so that these individual tests, whether it be the SAT or the ACT, are way more important than they used to be. Right. I remember like my dad talking to me about it, and he said, I only took the SAT once and I just kept moving on. So I would say that there are ways of getting at this problem in a different way than some of the um, people that I'm pushing back against. Um, and
Yeah,
I don't want us to also be fatalistic in the other way of throwing up our hands and saying, there's nothing else that we can do. This is the best system that's possible.
right. No, I think that you strike a lot of balance there. And, we do at long last have a really good discussion about race in America, and that we've covered from a number of angles, and that there have been groups throughout our history that have been disadvantaged by law. I mean, during my lifetime, it was perfectly legal to deny a black man or woman public accommodations. You could do that, and the law enforcement would back you up, because that was the law. We just, it's horribly wrong. And these stains take a long time to resolve. Um, but I'm hopeful that we can resolve it through coming together on common policy, and we can resolve it by coming through on what we can agree is a fair standard and a fair shot for everybody to benefit from and participate in the society. And I think that's what your columns in USA Today said, if I'm not mistaken. I hope I'm not
It's very true, and I totally agree with all that, with all those points. I think that there is a common ground to be had on this issue, and I think that there's a real way to move forward in ameliorating these differences over time. It'll take some time, but it's part of a broader movement towards a a greater equal opportunity, like a more realized equal opportunity.
Great. Sean, any closing thoughts for our audience today?
Only that I think that this issue is really important, even though I don't think it gets a lot of media coverage, and that sometimes just having a sensible policy and thinking through these issues in a nonpartisan way is a really important way to help our kids and achieve the best that they can.
Great. This is Rich Helppie. We've been talking today with Sean Michael Pigeon. He was author of a column in USA Today talking about standardized testing and the negative impacts on disadvantaged students as they prepare for college. An interesting perspective. I'm sure will generate a lot of great conversation around it. So, Sean, thank you again for being with us. And this is Rich Helppie signing off on the Common Bridge.
Thank you for watching Richard Helppie's Common Bridge. Please click the subscribe button below. Also, tune into our podcast, Richard Helppie's Common Bridge, on Apple, iHeart, Amazon, and others. Also, be sure to visit us online at richardhelppie.com.